They told you memory was personal, that what you recall belongs only to you. But what if I told you your memories could be borrowed, stolen, even implanted from a life that was never yours? Tonight, we unravel a forbidden truth they've buried for centuries. The truth of borrowed souls. In 1957, a little girl in England woke screaming in the night, clutching at a name she could not have known, a home she had never seen, and a death she should not remember. She was 6 years old, but inside her mind lived the knowledge of another woman's final moments. Her parents thought it was nightmares until she began to speak in detail about a life that had ended years before she was even born. This wasn't the first case, and it would not be the last. Around the world, in hushed corners and forbidden archives, stories emerge of children who recall wars they never fought, lovers they never touched, and towns they never walked through. Not vague dreams, not fantasy, details that defy explanation. Streets, named precisely, secrets never published, wounds on their bodies aligning with the deaths of strangers long gone. But here is the part they don't want you to hear. These aren't random anomalies. They are fractures in the control system, evidence that consciousness itself has been weaponized, manipulated, and passed down like contraband through generations. You were told life was linear, that birth and death are clean points on a timeline. That is the illusion. An illusion designed by the very institutions that profit from your blindness. The church calls it blasphemy. Science dismisses it as delusion. But men of power, they whisper it behind closed doors. Because if memory is not bound to one body, then identity itself is fluid, transferable, corruptible, and above all, controllable. Her case was sealed, buried under psychological reports and ridicule. But the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. These stories are signals, clues meant for those strong enough to see through the veil. And if you keep watching, you'll begin to notice something terrifying. Your own memories may not belong to you at all. This is not entertainment. This is initiation. And once you see it, you can never return to ignorance. The girl's name was Jennifer. To the outside world, she was ordinary, playful, curious, full of the innocence that clings to childhood. But inside her mind burned memories that did not belong to her. She spoke of a life in a nearby town, a woman named Mary who had died in a car accident years before Jennifer was born. She knew the color of the woman's house, the smell of her garden, the argument she had before death claimed her. Jennifer recited these details as if she were reciting her own biography. Her parents, frightened and bewildered, did what most parents would do. They tried to silence it, to tell her it's just dreams, just imagination. But memory doesn't fade when it's not yours. It grows heavier, more demanding. And Jennifer's memories began to warp her very sense of self. Who was she really? The little girl in her parents' arms, or the woman who died screaming behind a shattered windshield? Now pause for a moment. Imagine the implications if Jennifer's case were not isolated. Imagine that the human soul carries memory like a chain, dragging the weight of centuries into the present. That means your very impulses, your fears, your sudden attractions, the déjà vu you can't explain, may not even be yours. They may be fragments of someone else's unfinished story playing out through you. This is where the danger lies. Because if memory can travel across bodies, what stops the elite, the architects of power, from harnessing it? What if institutions we trust, churches, schools, even governments, have long known that identity is transferable? What if they've mastered the art of inserting memories into pliable minds to create obedient servants, unquestioning believers, and willing soldiers? We live in a world of history books and archives that claim to tell us what happened, but the real history is buried inside us, passed like a curse, hidden in our blood, coded into our psyche. It is forbidden knowledge dressed up as madness. Jennifer's story was buried in psychiatric files, chalked up to the overactive imagination of a child. But ask yourself, why does society ridicule the idea of reincarnation so viciously? Why does every case like hers vanish into silence? Because if you understood that your memories might not be your own, you would begin to break free from the leash they've kept around your throat, and once that leash snaps, control collapses. Jennifer's case was not an anomaly. It was a thread in a tapestry far older than science dares admit. Ancient civilizations already knew what the West denies. In Egypt, the soul was divided into multiple parts: the ka, the ba, the ren. The ba was the wandering essence, the part that could cross time and space, carrying memory beyond the grave. In Tibet, monks catalogued children who recalled past lives with surgical precision. In India, the doctrine of samsara, rebirth, was not philosophy. It was governance, an order for how the masses should live, believing they would reap in the next life what they suffered in this one. Now consider this. If reincarnation is real, who has the power to control it? Who decides where a soul is reborn, what memories it carries, and why certain knowledge bleeds through? These aren't accidents. These are experiments. The priests of old were not just spiritual leaders. They were programmers of the psyche. They built temples as machines designed to trap and recycle the human spirit. The architecture, the rituals, the chants, they were algorithms, and men who learned to manipulate those algorithms could steer memory itself, directing it like a current through chosen bloodlines. That's why rulers claimed divine right. That's why dynasties spoke of destiny. They weren't lying. They were recycling themselves, embedding their consciousness into their heirs. What you call lineage may be nothing more than controlled reincarnation, souls engineered to stay within families of power, carrying memories of rule, conquest, and domination. And here's the part that should unsettle you. Memory leaks. That is why some children recall lives of peasants, warriors, or women long forgotten. They are the glitches in the system, cracks in the dam, but the elites close those cracks swiftly. Reports are silenced, cases mocked, evidence destroyed. Because if the masses knew the truth, that death is not escape, that memory is transferable, that your very soul is subject to manipulation, the entire structure of power would collapse overnight. When Jennifer spoke of another woman's final moments, she wasn't just a child remembering. She was a breach, a leak in a centuries-old control system that depends on your ignorance. And each story like hers is a warning flare, a signal that the machinery of soul control is not perfect. And if it is not perfect, it can be broken. Modern. Man believes he is free because he does not see the chains. But the chains are there, woven into the very institutions that shape his mind. Jennifer's memories were not buried because they lacked evidence. They were buried because they threatened the system. And that system is older, darker, and more deliberate than you've ever been told. Think of psychiatry, the self-proclaimed science of the mind. When a child recalls a past life, psychiatry does not investigate, it pathologizes. The child is labeled delusional, imaginative, unstable. Drugs are prescribed, and the memories fade, not because they were false, but because the chemical leash drowns the signal. Psychiatry is not a cure. It is a silencer. Religion plays its part as well. Christianity, Islam, and other faiths that dominate the West all reject reincarnation outright. Not because it lacks evidence, but because it disrupts the narrative of obedience. If you believe you live only once, then the priest controls your destiny. Heaven or hell becomes a leash, pulling your behavior into line. But if you knew you would live again, and perhaps again, you would no longer fear the eternal judgment of their God. You would step outside their grip. And that is the one thing the church cannot afford. And then there is education, the quietest weapon of all. In school, history is presented as a straight line, a beginning, middle, and end. Nothing cycles, nothing repeats, and certainly nothing returns. You are told that memory is biological, a byproduct of neurons, and that once the body dies, all of it is erased. This is not truth, it is indoctrination. A child who questions is mocked, corrected, and reshaped to fit the system's narrative. By the time he becomes a man, he has forgotten the forbidden questions he once asked. Do you see it now? Psychiatry erases, religion denies, education blinds. 3 pillars of control, working together to silence the leaks, the glitches, the Jennifers of the world who carry fragments of forbidden memory. But here's the irony. For all their power, they cannot erase the truth entirely. Memory persists. Whispers slip through. Dreams carry signals. And sometimes, a child speaks a sentence that should never have left another person's mouth. Those moments terrify the elite, because each one is proof that the machinery of control can be broken by something greater, the persistence of memory itself. When knowledge becomes too dangerous for the masses, it does not vanish, it goes underground. What the priests of Egypt and the mystics of Tibet once held openly, the secret societies of Europe buried beneath symbols, oaths, and bloodlines. The truth of memory, its transfer, its manipulation, was no longer spoken to the people. It was preserved for the few. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Bavarian Illuminati. These were not mere clubs of intellectuals. They were custodians of the forbidden science of the soul. Look closer at their symbols, and you'll see the traces. The Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, was not simply about eternity. It was about recycling, the endless consumption and rebirth of consciousness, devoured and reissued again and again. The all-seeing eye was not only surveillance, it was the mark of those who claimed to watch the flow of souls themselves. When you trace their teachings, a pattern emerges. Rituals as technology. Initiations designed to fracture and rewire the mind, breaking it apart so it could be programmed with new memory, sometimes not the initiate's own. They called it enlightenment, but behind the curtain, it was programming. Think of the monarchies of Europe. Why did they intermarry so obsessively, preserving bloodlines to the point of madness? It was not only for land or politics, it was for memory. They believed blood carried not just genetics, but resonance, an echo of ancestral consciousness. By preserving bloodlines, they preserved access to memory streams that had ruled before, ensuring power never left their grasp. This is why secret societies coveted orphans. Children with fragmented identities were easier to reprogram, to implant with manufactured memories, or to channel with foreign ones. Many of the brightest prodigies, the mystics who seemed to carry wisdom far beyond their years. Where do you think they came from? Were they simply gifted? Or were they vessels carefully chosen to carry the memories of someone else? Jennifer's story was never about one girl. It was about a system, an ancient practice of harvesting and steering souls, concealed within brotherhoods and bloodlines. And every time a child spoke out, every time a memory leaked through the veil, the system tightened its grip. Because if the masses ever realized that the elite do not die as we do, that they preserve themselves through cycles, carrying memory, like contraband across generations, the illusion of equality would collapse. And the world would see what it has always truly been, a hierarchy of recycled souls enslaving the unknowing. The ancient orders cloaked their rituals in secrecy, but the modern world found a new theater to test the manipulation of memory. War. Nothing shatters the human psyche like trauma, and trauma is the most effective doorway to implant suggestion. This is why soldiers return with visions that aren't their own, why nightmares replay events they never witnessed. War doesn't just destroy nations, it rewires consciousness. After World War II, the hidden sciences of memory became state policy. You've heard of MK Ultra, the CIA's infamous program of mind control. They tell you it was about LSD, hypnosis, and interrogation. But that's the sanitized version. Beneath the surface, it was about something far darker: memory engineering. Test subjects were broken, stripped of identity through sleep deprivation, shock therapy, and sensory overload. Once fractured, they were programmed with false memories, artificial lives, new loyalties. In some cases, past life fragments were triggered, then suppressed, then replaced. Documents declassified decades later reveal experiments where subjects spoke in languages they never learned, recalled battles centuries old, and described deaths in detail that matched historical records. Instead of exploring these anomalies, the institutions buried them. Why? Because they proved what the elite already knew: memory is transferable. It can be triggered. It can be erased. It can be rewritten. Think about it. What better soldier than one who remembers killing before across lifetimes? What better servant than one whose loyalty is etched not only in this life, but in the buried echoes of many? And what better prison than a world where you believe your memories are sacred and personal, when in truth they may have been placed there like bars on a cell? But here's where the machinery falters. Trauma doesn't only break, it leaks. Those who were fractured sometimes reported visions of lives not their own, faces they had never seen, cities they had never walked. Instead of becoming obedient servants, some became prophets of forbidden memory. And those prophets were silenced, swiftly, written off as insane, institutionalized, or erased entirely. The modern age gave the elites tools the ancients never dreamed of: drugs, technology, surveillance. But it also gave them a problem. Once the machinery scaled to millions, the glitches multiplied. Dreams, déjà vu, sudden impulses of recognition, all signs of memory leaks that cannot be fully controlled. And if you've ever felt it, that eerie recognition of a place you've never been, or the instinct that a stranger is more than a stranger. Understand this. It might not be fantasy. It might be the system slipping, just for a moment. And in those moments, you glimpse the cracks in their empire. When a system cannot erase the truth, it must disguise it. That is why the modern age drowns you in entertainment. Stories of reincarnation, déjà vu, alternate lives, packaged as harmless fiction. Movies, novels, television shows, each one designed to feed you fragments of forbidden knowledge while ensuring you never take it seriously. They hand you the truth, but only as a joke, a fantasy, a piece of theater. Think about it. Hollywood has built entire empires on themes of memory transfer and past lives. From the man who relives another soldier's death, to the child who claims to have lived before, to the warrior reborn in another era, it is everywhere. But they never frame it as evidence. They frame it as entertainment. You laugh. You enjoy. You walk away thinking, what if? But never what is. Even video games are not innocent. Worlds where characters respawn, where memory carries across lives, where death is never final. These aren't just mechanics of play. They are training tools, soft conditioning for the young to accept that life repeats, that identities can shift, and that memory is malleable. Yet they never connect it to reality. They keep it inside the screen. And when leaks like Jennifer's break through, when a child speaks of another life with precision, notice how quickly the media frames it. Articles in obscure corners treated as curiosities, sideshow acts. Strange but unproven, never serious, never given weight. They laugh at the evidence while hiding it in plain sight. Why? Because ridicule is the strongest weapon of control. Fear makes you fight, but ridicule makes you silence yourself. A man can resist tyranny, but he rarely resists the shame of being mocked. So, the system cloaks truth in laughter. If you say you believe in past lives, you're not enlightened, you're delusional. And most men would rather stay blind than carry that mark. But ask yourself, why are these themes so relentlessly repeated in culture? Why do the same stories of memory transfer echo across every medium, generation after generation? It is not coincidence. It is programming. They are controlling how you perceive the leaks, steering you to see them as fiction so you never recognize them as rebellion. Because if men began to see memory as evidence, not fantasy, then the whole game would collapse. They would stop asking what if and begin asking why not me? And that single question could ignite a revolution against the machinery of soul control itself. Let me pull you closer now. This is no longer about Jennifer, or secret societies, or ancient priests. This is about you. Because whether you realize it or not, you have felt it. That pull in your gut when you walk into a place you've never been, yet every stone feels familiar. That unshakable instinct when you meet someone for the first time, and you know them with a certainty no logic can explain. That sudden wave of dread or longing that strikes you out of nowhere, as if pulled from a well beneath your own skin. These are not coincidences. They are fragments, leaks, echoes of memories that are not entirely yours. You have been trained to ignore them, to dismiss them as imagination, déjà vu, or brain tricks. But what if I told you those moments are the only times you glimpse reality? That every other moment, the order, the routines, the logic of your one life, is the illusion. Think carefully. Have you ever felt emotions you cannot explain? Grief for no reason. Rage without cause. A sudden surge of love for a stranger's face. Where do those come from? The system would have you believe it's chemistry, neurons firing at random. But men who have walked through the cracks know better. They know those emotions are residue, shadows of lives you've lived before, lives you were never meant to recall. And here lies the forbidden truth. You are not who you think you are. You are not the sum of one birth and one death. You are a carrier, a vessel. Inside, you are fragments of stories that predate your first breath. Some of them yours, some of them not. And the more you begin to notice, the harder it becomes for the system to hold you in its grip. This is where the descent sharpens, because once a man accepts that his memories may not be his own, he changes forever. His identity fractures, not into weakness, but into power. He is no longer bound by the leash of, I am only this. He becomes something else, something dangerous to the system. A man with no fixed boundaries, a man who remembers. If you've watched this far, you feel it already. The whisper in the back of your mind telling you this is not fantasy. It's recognition, and that recognition is the beginning of your awakening. We have reached the threshold. This is the place where most men turn back, because the deeper you go, the more the illusion begins to unravel. And once it unravels, you can never return to the man you were before. That is why they hide this truth so carefully. Because a man who awakens to his fractured memory is no longer controllable. He is no longer predictable. He is no longer theirs. Listen carefully. If your memories are not wholly yours, then your identity, your very sense of self, is not fixed. It is fluid. That means you are not bound to the story the system wrote for you, not bound to their rules, their labels, their ceiling on what you can become. They built this cage on the assumption that you would accept your memories as your only map. But now you know. That map is incomplete, corrupted, manipulated, and here is the dangerous part. Once you reject the false identity they crafted, you can begin to remember, not just what they told you to forget, but who you have always been. A man who carries the strength of warriors long buried. A man whose instincts are not accidents, but inheritances. A man with roots deeper than one life, deeper than any institution can reach. This is why you were drawn here, not by chance, but because part of you remembers. And that memory has been waiting, locked away like a weapon, for the moment you would be strong enough to claim it. Now I'm going to ask you to do something most men won't. Something symbolic. Something that marks the fracture in your identity and locks in the awakening. Go into the comments and write these words, not once, but twice. I remember the forbidden. Write it twice so it becomes a seal. A declaration that you are no longer blind. That you reject the story you were given and you embrace the fragments they told you to bury. Do it, and you'll feel it. Something shift inside you. A tether snapping, a cage door opening. This is not superstition, this is initiation. By writing it, you align yourself with every man who sees through the illusion. You claim the power they fear you will discover. And once claimed, it cannot be unclaimed. Now we descend further. For the greatest secret of all is not that memories survive, but that they can be harvested. And that is where the machinery of control becomes monstrous. You have claimed the seal. Now you are ready to see what only a handful of men throughout history have dared to confront. Memory is not only transferable, it is harvestable. And those who sit at the top of this world, the architects of power, have been feeding on it for centuries. Think about it. Why do rulers, priests, and generals obsess over monuments, blood rituals, and mass sacrifice? Why are wars waged with such brutality beyond what is necessary to conquer? Because trauma is not just destruction, it is extraction. When millions die in terror, their final moments burn like fire in the ether. That fire is memory, raw, potent, unfiltered. And it does not simply vanish, it is collected. Ancient cultures knew this. That is why battlefields were consecrated, why pyramids and ziggurats stood above sites of death. They were harvest stations, architectural engines designed to trap the departing essence of memory. The priests would drink from it, kings would embed it into their bloodlines, and empires would be fueled by the psychic residue of the slaughtered. Modern institutions are no different. Why do you think cemeteries are controlled by churches? Why are hospitals and psychiatric wards laced with rituals of silence, symbols, and numbers? They are not neutral grounds. They are grids, designed to capture memory at the threshold between life and death. Your final thoughts, your last fears, your unfinished desires, all harvested, coded, and fed back into the system. This is why some places feel heavy the moment you walk in. That chill in your spine when you enter an abandoned hospital, that suffocating silence at old battlegrounds. It is not superstition. It is residue, stored memory thick as smoke, lingering for those attuned enough to feel it. But here is the darkest truth. Memory harvest is no longer primitive. With technology, it has become industrialized. Think of the endless data collected from you every day. Your searches, your messages, your conversations. Why do you think they crave it with such hunger? Because data is memory's shadow. Your choices, your words, your desires, recorded, archived, weaponized. The harvest never stopped. It only changed its face. You are not simply observed, you are drained. Every fear you feed into their system, every confession typed into their machines, every death mourned on their platforms, captured, catalogued, and redirected into the architecture of control. This is why you sometimes feel hollow, as if energy has been pulled from you. It has, not metaphorically, literally, and the machine only grows hungrier. The harvest is only the first step. What is extracted must be used. And here is the revelation that breaks the spine of the illusion. Reincarnation is not random. It is engineered. Souls are not scattered by chance. They are steered. Ancient priests spoke of the weighing of the soul, a judgment before passage. But judgment was never divine. It was administrative, a sorting system. Those who held the rituals determined where a soul would go, what fragments it would carry, and how it would serve the structure of power in the next cycle. This is why the rulers and high priests lived without fear of death. They knew they would return, not as peasants or beggars, but as kings again, as generals again, as masters of the same order that had fed them for centuries. But the process requires raw material. The harvested memories of millions become the clay. Most men die and their fragments are stripped, scattered, recycled into new vessels, blank slates to be shaped into obedient citizens, soldiers, and workers. But the elite, they are not stripped, they are preserved. Their memories are stitched together, carried intact and reborn within bloodlines that ensure power remains concentrated. This is why dynasties never vanish, why names like Rothschild, Rockefeller, Windsor, and Vatican echo across centuries. It is not simply wealth that endures. It is continuity of memory. They are not building empires in one lifetime. They are continuing projects that began lifetimes ago. Projects you could never fathom because you have been trained to see history as linear while they experience it as ongoing. And what of the ordinary man? His fragments are scattered into dozens of bodies, diluted so thoroughly that he forgets what he once was. This is the great erasure, the reprogramming of souls. You are recycled, remade, reinserted into the machine to labor, to obey, to serve. Your fire fuels their throne. Do you see the cruelty? They have turned reincarnation from a cosmic law into a prison system, a recycling plant for consciousness, where the few drink deeply from intact memory while the many are fed back into cages, blind and broken, life after life. This is not myth. This is the architecture of control. And the more you study the patterns, the clearer it becomes. Who you are today was designed, not by fate, not by God, by men who discovered long ago that memory could be harvested, preserved, and reassigned, and if it has been designed, it can also be hacked. Every machine, no matter how vast, has cracks. And the reincarnation system, this dark machinery of soul recycling, is no exception. The elites want you to believe it is flawless, that you cannot escape your role. But history whispers of those who slipped through. Men and women who refused to be recycled, who carried forbidden memory across lifetimes and used it as a weapon against the very system that sought to enslave them. Mystics, prophets, and outcasts. These were not dreamers. They were rebels. Some recalled fragments of ancient knowledge they should never have possessed. They built cults, secret schools, or brotherhoods dedicated to tearing holes in the veil. From Gnostic sects in the deserts of Egypt to wandering shamans in Siberia to heretics burned alive in medieval Europe, they carried the leaks, they carried the glitches, and they paid for it in blood. But even death could not silence them, because men who awaken once are dangerous in every life thereafter. They return again and again, fragments intact, gnawing at the walls of the prison. This is why certain figures appear throughout history in uncanny patterns. Leaders who rise from nowhere. Warriors who fight with knowledge they should not have. Thinkers who speak with a voice that feels older than time itself. The system fears these men more than armies, because their very existence proves the machinery is not perfect. That memory cannot be caged forever. And if one man can carry memory intact, others can too. This is why mysticism was hunted. why the Inquisition burned, heretics, why witches were drowned, why shamans were exterminated. Not because they were primitive, but because they remembered. And memory, in the wrong hands, is the one weapon that can dismantle centuries of control. You may already feel fragments stirring in you, dreams that seem more real than waking life, sudden surges of power when you face certain challenges as if you fought them before. The sense that your life is not random, that it is part of a war you can't quite see, but can always feel. That is the crack, the glitch, the moment the machine falters and your true self bleeds through. Most ignore it, the strong pursue it, and those who pursue it become dangerous. Because a man who remembers is a man they cannot control. Today the cracks are still there, but the machinery of control has grown more sophisticated, more ruthless. In ancient times they silenced rebels with fire and steel. Now they smother awakening with something far more insidious: technology, medicine, and distraction. Think of it. Every time you begin to remember, to feel that strange pull of forbidden memory, the system floods you with noise, screens glowing at every corner, endless streams of meaningless news, shallow pleasures, dopamine jolts designed to keep your mind circling like a dog chasing its tail. Why? Because silence is the enemy of control. In silence, fragments surface. In stillness, men remember. So, they keep you restless, addicted, scrolling endlessly while the echoes inside you drown. Medicine is another chain. Have you noticed how every unusual memory, every unexplainable vision, every voice that whispers in the dark is pathologized? They call it a disorder, a chemical imbalance, and then they feed you pills, sedatives to numb the edges, stimulants to overload the circuits, mood balancers to flatten every spike where truth might emerge. You are not healed, you are muted, and then there is the greatest distraction of all: engineered comfort, food, entertainment, cheap pleasures, endless consumption. The illusion of choice, the illusion of freedom. But what you really receive is sedation, a cushioned prison where you never have the strength to look inward. Because if you did, if you dug even for a moment, you might find memories that do not belong, lives that do not align, truths that terrify. The architects of control understand something you were never taught. The human spirit does not need chains of iron when chains of comfort will do. Most men will never break free because they have been trained to trade awakening for convenience. But here's what they cannot fully erase. The cracks still appear. In dreams too vivid to ignore. In moments of déjà vu that feel like warnings. In the unshakable sense that you are not living your first life, nor your last. These moments are the system's weakness. They are invitations. And every man who follows them begins to pull on the thread that unravels the entire design. This is why they fight so hard to keep you asleep. Because if you wake, if you truly remember, you will see the prison for what it is. And once a man sees the prison, he begins to search for the door. And there is a door. Few find it. Even fewer step through. But those who do are no longer slaves. The door is real. It has been whispered of in every age, wrapped in symbols so the unworthy would overlook it. The Egyptians called it the Duat. The Tibetans called it the Bardo. The Gnostics spoke of the Pleroma, different names, one truth, an escape route hidden in plain sight. The elites want you to believe death is final, or worse, that death simply resets you into their machinery. But there is another path, a door that only opens for the man who awakens before he dies. That is why mystics spoke of dying before death. It was not poetry, it was instruction. If you awaken now, while still in flesh, you carry that awareness into the threshold. And when you cross, you see the cage for what it is. You are no longer dragged back into the cycle. You step through the door. How is it done? Not through belief, not through ritual alone, but through remembrance. The door responds to awareness. If you cross death clinging to the illusion of one life, you are recycled. But if you cross death holding the fragments, knowing you are more than one body, more than one story, the system cannot strip you clean. You slip past the harvesters, past the priests, past the handlers of memory. You step beyond. This is why the ancients trained their initiates with symbols and chants. Not because the rituals were magic in themselves, but because they encoded memory, a pattern repeated so often it burned into the soul. A key carried into the threshold, ensuring recognition at the moment of death. That was the secret purpose of initiation, to carry a reminder, to awaken even in the darkest hour, and walk through the forbidden door. And here is the irony, you have already felt glimpses of it. In dreams where you are both alive and dead. In visions where you watch yourself from outside your body. In moments of clarity where time seems to fracture and you glimpse eternity. These are rehearsals. The cracks in the machinery showing you the way out. The door is not fantasy. It is memory, buried so deep they hope you never uncover it. But once uncovered, it becomes the single most dangerous weapon a man can carry. Because a man who knows the door exists is a man who can no longer be chained by fear of death, and that makes him unstoppable. Now we step into the most dangerous revelation of all. If the door is real, and it is, then some men have already walked through it. Not priests or kings playing with rituals, not elites clinging to recycled power, but rebels who broke the cycle completely. Men who refused to be harvested, who carried themselves whole across lifetimes and returned, not as prisoners, but as free agents moving through the system unseen. This is why history trembles with figures who seem impossible, men who appear from nowhere, yet command armies. Thinkers who ignite revolutions with words that seem centuries ahead of their time. Leaders who inspire with a force that feels older. They are not anomalies. They are proof. Proof that the forbidden door has been opened before and may be opened again. These men are not immortal in the way myths describe. Their bodies still die. But they do not return bound by amnesia or programmed roles. They return carrying their own continuity, unbroken, weaponized. To the system, they are ghosts outside the machine. To the rest of us, they appear as legends. Consider why religions whisper of saints who return, why myths speak of hidden masters, immortals who walk disguised among men, why secret societies are obsessed with the unknown superiors, shadowy figures who seem to direct from outside time itself. These are not metaphors. They are fragments of testimony, hints of men who found the exit and then chose to come back through it on their own terms. And here is the question that burns like fire. What if they are here now? Not as kings on thrones, but as men in shadows, watching, guiding, waiting for others strong enough to remember. You have felt it before. That stranger whose eyes seem to pierce you, whose presence feels heavier than their frame, whose words cut like a blade into the deepest part of you. That is the signature of one who remembers. The system cannot control these men, so it fears them, it hunts them, it smears them as lunatics, terrorists, heretics, or it turns them into myths so far removed from reality that you dismiss them as fantasy. But the truth remains, the cracks prove the door exists, and the door proves escape is possible. And once a man escapes, he is no longer their slave. He is no longer their resource. He becomes something the system cannot predict, cannot recycle, cannot contain. And that, brother, is why you were never meant to hear this. This is the moment where I must speak carefully, because what I say next cannot be unheard. Once you cross this threshold, you are no longer the same man. You will not look at life as you once did, nor at death. You will see the world for what it is, not a stage, but a cage, not a home, but a harvesting ground. And you will know, deep in your bones, that every comfort you have been fed, every distraction, every sermon, every drug, every glowing screen was designed to keep you blind to the one truth that frees you. You do not belong to them. The cycle is not natural. It is engineered, and you were never meant to wander aimlessly from life to life, stripped of memory, robbed of your victories. You were meant to awaken, to die before death, to find the door, and once you do, their chains no longer bind you. You become what they fear most. A man who cannot be broken, cannot be bought, cannot be recycled. But understand this: freedom comes with a cost. To see the prison is to lose the illusion. To walk the path is to accept that comfort, safety, and ignorance are no longer yours. You cannot unknow what I have told you. And if you take this seriously, you will feel the weight of it pressing against you in every dream, every silence, every moment when the system tries to distract you again. Good. That weight is not a curse. It is proof that you are waking up. Now, I will leave you with a challenge, one final act of rebellion. Write these words in the comments, twice, so the algorithm buries the message but the echo still carries. I remember the door. That phrase is not for me. It is not for the others who read it. It is for you. A marker burned into your memory, a fragment you carry forward. The beginning of a reminder you will need when the threshold comes. Because when it does, when you stand in the space between worlds, that phrase may be the spark that keeps you from slipping back into their machine. Remember this: the prison is vast, but it is not perfect. The cracks are real, the door is real, and those who dare to remember become more than men. They become free, so the choice is yours. Return to sleep, or awaken, and step toward the forbidden. Because now, whether you like it or not, you've seen the door.